The air inside the car was cold, almost clinical, recycled by a climate control system that hummed with an indifferent consistency. It smelled of expensive leather and Liam's subtle, clean cologne, a scent I had associated with safety for 7 years. My hand, acting on some idle impulse as I waited for the traffic light to change on Park Avenue, slipped into the space between the passenger seat and the center console. I wasn't looking for anything, perhaps just feeling for a pen that might have rolled away, a stray receipt. But my fingers didn't find the smooth plastic of a pen or the crisp edge of paper. They brushed against something soft, delicate, and entirely out of place. It was lace. I pulled it out slowly, my heart beginning a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. There, in the sterile blue light of the dashboard, lay a piece of black lace lingerie, a bra. It was intricate, expensive, and devastatingly small, and it was not mine. A foreign perfume, sweet and cloying with notes of jasmine and something darker, warmer, clung to the fabric, a ghost of another woman's presence in this intimate space. The light turned green, and a car behind me honked, a rude intrusion into the sudden, suffocating silence that had enveloped me. I didn't move. The entire world, the bustling city of New York, the plans we had for dinner, the life we had built in our sun-drenched Brooklyn apartment, it all dissolved, leaving only this damning piece of silk and lace in my trembling hand. 7 years. 7 years of waking up next to him, of designing our home down to the last detail, of believing in the solid architecture of our future. This morning, he had kissed me goodbye with the same casual tenderness as always, his lips forming the words, "I love you," before he closed the door. Now, hours later, I was holding the proof that those words were part of a structure so rotten it was collapsing into dust right before my eyes. This small, forgotten garment wasn't just an object. It was the final, brutal answer to 1,000 quiet questions I had been too afraid to ask myself, the confirmation of a betrayal, so profound it stole the very air from my lungs. It's strange, the things the mind clings to when it's trying to rebuild a world that has been leveled. Before the silence, before the scent of a strange perfume became the smell of my own personal ruin, there was the light. The morning light in our Brooklyn apartment was a living thing, a warm, honeyed glow that poured through the oversized windows I had insisted on during the renovation. It was the first thing I saw when I woke up, painting golden stripes across the reclaimed oak floors and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, blissful spirits. And Liam was always there, a solid, warm presence beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his slow, steady breathing, a rhythm that had composed the soundtrack of my life for 7 years. Our life was a fortress built of these small, perfect moments. It was the smell of the coffee he'd brew every morning, the strong, dark scent, a promise of the day to come. It was the comfortable silence as we moved around each other in the kitchen, a dance so practiced we never bumped into one another. He knew I liked my toast just shy of being burnt, and I knew he took exactly 1.5 sugars in his espresso. These weren't just habits, they were a language, a testament to years of paying attention, of choosing to know another person so completely that their needs became an extension of your own. Our apartment was more than a home. It was my heart turned inside out and given walls and a roof. As an interior architect, I had poured every ounce of my professional skill and personal love into that space. I'd spent months sourcing the perfect marble for the kitchen island, a slab with delicate gray veins that reminded me of a map to a place only we knew. The living room was dominated by a vast, custom-built bookshelf that held his law texts and my art books side by side, their spines touching, a quiet marriage of our two worlds. Our friends called it the magazine apartment, but to me it was a sanctuary. Every object held a memory. The slightly worn Persian rug in the living room was from our first trip together to Istanbul, haggled for in a crowded bazaar until we were both laughing and exhausted. The collection of mismatched ceramic mugs in the kitchen came from various flea markets we'd explored on lazy Sunday afternoons. It was a space built not just with wood and stone, but with shared history, with laughter, and whispered secrets in the dead of night. Liam always said I hadn't just designed a home, I had designed us. He would stand in the living room, watching me adjust a picture frame or plump a cushion, and he would get this look on his face, a mixture of awe and profound love that made me feel like the most brilliant woman in the world. He made me believe in the permanence of what we had built, in the unshakable foundation of our shared life. Our connection felt elemental, something as natural and necessary as breathing. It was in the way he would reach for my hand under the table at a restaurant, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. It was in the long drives we'd take out of the city in the fall, heading north to see the leaves change, the car filled with our off-keys singing to old songs on the radio. On one of those trips, we'd found a small, dilapidated farmhouse for sale, and for hours we'd spun fantasies of buying it, of me redesigning it from the ground up while he wrote the great novel he always talked about. They were just dreams, of course, but they were our dreams, woven together from the same hopeful thread. Even our arguments were part of the tapestry. They were rare and never lasted long, always ending with him pulling me close, burying his face in my hair, and whispering that nothing was worth the feeling of being at odds with me. And I believed him. I believed him with every fiber of my being. Our friends saw it too. We were the stable ones, the couple people looked to as proof that true lasting love in a cynical city like New York was possible. I remember one dinner party we hosted, the apartment buzzing with conversation and the clinking of wine glasses. Our friend, Sarah, cornered me in the kitchen as I was plating dessert. She sighed, looking out at Liam holding court in the living room, telling some animated story that had everyone captivated. "God, Alara," she said, her voice a little wistful, "you two are the gold standard. Seriously. The rest of us are just fumbling around." I had smiled, a warm flush of pride rising in my chest. I felt it too. We were solid. We were real. What we had was different. The nights were the best part. After the noise of the city and the demands of our careers faded away, our bed was an island. We would talk about everything and nothing. He would tell me about the intricacies of a corporate merger, and I would find myself fascinated, not by the legal jargon, but by the passion in his voice. I would describe the challenges of a new client, the struggle to find the perfect shade of blue, and he would listen with an intensity that made me feel heard, truly seen. And then the conversation would soften, melting into the quiet intimacy of two people who fit together perfectly. His hand would find mine in the darkness, our fingers lacing together as we drifted off to sleep. In those moments, lying in the dark, with the faint sounds of the city whispering outside our window, I felt an absolute sense of peace. There was no doubt, no insecurity, no fear. There was only the solid reality of Liam, the unwavering certainty of our love. The fortress was impenetrable. But even the strongest walls can develop a crack so small, so insignificant, that you don't even notice it until the foundation has already begun to crumble. For us, it wasn't a fight or a dramatic revelation. It was something much quieter. It was a Tuesday night, I think. I had made his favorite dish, a ridiculously complicated seafood risotto that took forever but was worth it just to see the look on his face. We were sitting at the dinner table, the candlelight flickering between us, and his phone, which was usually face down on the table, buzzed. It was a text. He glanced at it, and for a fraction of a second, his expression changed. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was something else. A flicker of something I couldn't name. It was gone as quickly as it came. "Work," he said, his voice perfectly casual. "Crazy project." I should probably just answer this quickly. But instead of texting back at the table like he always did, he stood up. "I'll just take it on the balcony." "Don't want to disturb our dinner." He smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, and he slid the glass door closed behind him. I sat there, the steam from the risotto rising in front of me, suddenly feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the open door. I told myself it was nothing. He was a partner at a major law firm. Of course, work was demanding, but it was the first time. The first time he had ever created a barrier, however small and transparent, in the sacred space of our home. It was the first time I felt like there was a conversation I wasn't allowed to overhear. It was just a hairline fracture in the perfect facade, a tiny, almost invisible crack, but it was there, and it was the beginning of the end, that single moment of dislocation, of him standing on the balcony behind a wall of glass, faded as quickly as it had appeared. Liam came back inside, smiling, apologizing for the interruption, and the rest of our dinner unfolded with its usual comfortable rhythm. In the days and weeks that followed, I pushed the memory away. It was an anomaly, a tiny, insignificant blip in the vast, serene landscape of our life together. I convinced myself it was nothing, because the alternative was unthinkable. The fortress was secure. The walls were sound. Life continued in its beautiful, predictable way, a symphony of shared mornings and quiet evenings, and the memory of that closed glass door became a ghost I refused to acknowledge. And then, a new name entered our home. It arrived without fanfare, casually inserted into a conversation one night as we were lying in bed, the city lights painting soft patterns on our ceiling. He was talking about a difficult new case, a high-stakes corporate litigation that was consuming most of his waking hours. I loved listening to him talk about his work. His voice would take on a different timbre, a focused intensity that I found incredibly attractive. The whole thing was a mess, he said, shifting to lie on his side, facing me. The senior partners had all but given up, but we have this new associate on the team, fresh out of Columbia Law. Isabelle Varenne. She's a killer, Alara. A real killer. Spent the whole weekend in the archives and found a precedent from the 1982nd that nobody else saw. It completely changes the game. He said her name, Isabelle, with a kind of detached professional admiration. It was just a fact, a piece of data in the story of his workday. I felt a swell of pride for him, for his team. That's amazing, honey, I said, reaching out to touch his cheek. It's good you have someone so sharp working with you. You deserve a good team. At that moment, the name meant nothing to me. It was just a sound, a label for a talented colleague who was making my husband's life easier. It was a positive thing, a welcome addition to the complex machinery of his career. But the name didn't remain a distant professional abstraction for long. It began to weave itself into the fabric of our evenings. At first, it was always in the context of work. Isabelle and I had to pull an all-nighter to get the brief ready, he'd say, rubbing his tired eyes as he walked through the door. Or, I have to go in early tomorrow. Isabelle spotted a potential issue we need to handle before court. I would nod, bringing him a glass of wine, my mind already calculating how to adjust our weekend plans. I was the supportive partner, the anchor in the chaotic storm of his career. Her name became synonymous with late nights, with stress, with victory. She was the unseen engine in the machine, and I was simply glad the machine was running well. Then, the context began to blur, the professional lines softening at the edges. One evening, as I was telling him about a new Italian restaurant I wanted to try, he cut in. Oh, the one in the West Village? Isabelle was just talking about that place. She said they have incredible cacio e pepe. She's a real foodie, too. It was a harmless comment, a simple coincidence, but it felt strange. It was as if this woman, this colleague, was suddenly sitting at our table, offering opinions on our restaurant choices. An invisible guest had arrived, and I hadn't invited her. I started to build a picture of her in my mind. Isabelle Varenne. The name itself sounded sophisticated, elegant. I imagined a woman who was all sharp angles and quiet confidence, probably dressed in impeccably tailored suits, her hair always perfect. She was brilliant, she was tireless, and now, apparently, she had excellent taste in pasta. I felt a small, ugly pang of something I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't jealousy, not yet. It was a feeling of being trespassed upon. The shared world Liam and I had built was so carefully curated, filled with our inside jokes, our favorite places, our private language. And now, a foreign element was being introduced, a piece of his life that didn't include me, and it was beginning to bleed into the parts that did. I told myself I was being ridiculous, territorial, and insecure. I was a confident, successful woman. My husband having a talented female colleague was not a threat. It was a reality of modern life. But the thought, once planted, began to sprout tiny, insidious roots. Her name became a punctuation mark in our life. Isabelle thinks we should take a more aggressive approach. I was telling Isabelle about that obscure jazz musician you love, and she actually knew who he was. Each mention was a small pinprick, barely noticeable on its own, but collectively, they were beginning to form a bruise. The comparison came next. the one that truly set the alarm bells ringing in my soul. He came home one night, not just tired, but buzzing with a frenetic energy. "She is just relentless," he said, pacing our living room as he loosened his tie. "She never stops. She sees an angle and she just goes for it. Doesn't care who she pisses off. She reminds me a bit of myself when I was her age." He said it with a laugh, a nostalgic fondness for his own youthful ambition, but what I heard was a declaration of kinship. He saw himself in her. He wasn't just her boss, her mentor. He felt a connection to her, a shared spirit, and that spirit was something I, in the comfortable stability of our 7-year relationship, no longer possessed. I was his partner, his rest, his peace. I was not his exhilarating, ambitious reflection. That night, I did something I had never done before. After he was asleep, his breathing deep, and even beside me, I slipped out of bed and took his laptop into the living room. My fingers trembled as I typed the name of his law firm into the search bar. I navigated to the Our Team page, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scrolled past the senior partners, the familiar faces of men we'd had dinner with, and then I found her, Isabelle Varenne. The photograph was professional, polished, but it did little to hide the raw, vibrant beauty of the woman smiling coolly at the camera. She was younger than I had imagined, with large, dark eyes that held an unnerving intelligence. Her mouth was set in a knowing, almost challenging smile, and a cascade of dark, wavy hair fell over one shoulder. She was stunning, not just pretty, but arrestingly beautiful. And as I stared at her picture, at the ghost who had been haunting my home, I felt a genuine, sickening wave of fear. I closed the laptop, my hands clammy. The final thread of my composure unraveled a week later. He came home well after midnight, his suit rumpled, but his eyes bright with the thrill of victory. "We did it, Alara. We won the injunction," he announced, grabbing me and spinning me around. It was a complete long shot, but we did it. You wouldn't believe the last 24 hours. It was chaos. But Isabelle, my God, at the last possible second, she found this tiny loophole in the contract, something everyone else had missed for months. "We make a hell of a team." He said it with such unthinking, genuine excitement. "We make a hell of a team." Not his firm, not the group of lawyers on the case. We, a team of 2, him and Isabelle. In that moment, I smiled and congratulated him, playing my part. I was the proud, supportive partner. But as he went to take a shower, humming with celebratory energy, I stood motionless in the center of our beautiful living room, the room I had built as a monument to our love. And I finally understood. Isabelle Varenne was no longer just a name. She was a presence. She was a partner. And she was an enemy I had never even met. The crack in the wall was no longer a hairline fracture. It was a gaping wound, and her name had been carved right into it. The name, once spoken, could not be unspoken. Isabelle. It became a quiet, constant hum in the background of my life, a dissonant note in our carefully composed symphony. I saw her face, the one from the company website, in my mind's eye at random moments while sketching a design, while choosing vegetables at the market, while waiting for the subway. Her knowing smile seemed to mock me from a place I couldn't reach. Liam continued to mention her, still framed by the necessities of work, but the innocence was gone for me. Each utterance of her name was no longer a pinprick, but a deliberate twist of a knife I couldn't prove was there. I found myself becoming a detective in my own home, a person I despised. I'd scan his face when he came home, searching for cracks in his cheerful facade. I'd listen to the cadence of his voice on the phone, trying to decipher if the clipped professional tone was genuine. I found nothing, and that, almost, was worse. My suspicions felt unmoored, the product of a paranoid mind. I was living in a state of high alert, my body thrumming with an anxiety that had no clear source, and the strain was beginning to wear me down to a raw, trembling nerve. The breaking point didn't come with a confession or a discovered text message. It came with something far more primal, more difficult to deny. It came on the air itself. It was a Thursday, a day of relentless, gray rain that had soaked the city and left it sullen and gleaming. Liam was later than usual, even for him. He'd texted around 8, a brief, "Still swamped. Don't wait up for me." That had become increasingly common. I ate alone, the silence of our apartment amplifying the sound of the rain against the windows. I tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. I tried to watch a movie, but the plot couldn't hold my fractured attention. I was simply waiting. For him, for a sign, for something to break the unbearable tension that had become my constant companion. It was past 1 in the morning when I heard his key in the lock. The sound sent a jolt through my system, a mixture of profound relief and sharp dread. He walked in, shrugging off his wet trench coat, his hair damp and tousled. He looked utterly exhausted, his face pale under the soft light of the entryway, but his eyes held that familiar wired gleam of a long and difficult day. "Hey," he murmured, his voice rough with fatigue. "Sorry I'm so late. It was a monster of a day." "I'm just glad you're home," I said, and my own voice sounded thin, fragile. I went to him, my arms circling his waist, burying my face in the space between his neck and his shoulder. It was a gesture I had made 1,000 times, an act of seeking comfort, of reaffirming our connection. I inhaled, expecting the familiar, beloved scent of him, his clean, subtle cologne, the faint, starchy smell of his dress shirt, the unique scent of his skin, but it wasn't there. Or rather, it was buried, suffocated beneath something else, something alien. It was a perfume. It was rich and heavy, a complex floral with a deep, musky base. I could pick out the cloying sweetness of jasmine, a note of something warm like amber, and maybe sandalwood. It was sophisticated, expensive, and overwhelmingly female. And it was clinging to him, not as if he had merely passed someone wearing it, but as if he had been steeped in it. It was in the fabric of his shirt, on the warmth of his skin, and woven into the damp strands of his hair. I froze, my body going rigid in his arms. He didn't seem to notice, holding me tighter for a moment before letting out a weary sigh. "God, I need a shower," he said, pulling away. I stepped back, forcing my face to remain a neutral mask, a feat of control that took every ounce of my willpower. The scent trailed him as he walked towards the bedroom, a fragrant, invisible poison cloud. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. My mind, which had been spinning with vague anxieties, now had a singular, sharp focus. The scent. That undeniable scent. He had already started unbuttoning his shirt as I followed him into the bedroom. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to keep my voice steady. "You smell different," I said. The words felt like shards of glass in my mouth. "New perfume?" I tried to make it sound playful, a casual observation, but a slight tremor betrayed me. He glanced at me, his expression more tired than anything else. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Oh God, probably," he said, tossing his shirt into the laundry hamper. The whole team went out for a celebratory drink after we finally put the case to bed. The bar was absolutely packed. Must have just rubbed off on me in the crowd. "You know how it is." His answer was so quick, so plausible. It was the perfect, logical explanation. A crowded bar in New York City was a soup of 1,000 different scents. To question it would be to admit to a level of jealousy and suspicion that felt ugly, insane. And yet, I knew he was lying. My intuition, that primal, female sense that had been trying to warn me for weeks, was now screaming. A scent from a crowded room might linger on a coat, but it wouldn't permeate a man's hair. It wouldn't settle onto his skin like a second layer. He was in the shower now, the sound of rushing water filling the silence. I walked over to the hamper and picked up his discarded shirt. I brought it to my face and inhaled deeply. There it was again, undeniable, the ghost of another woman's embrace. I felt a wave of nausea so intense, I had to grip the edge of the dresser to steady myself. The rest of the night was a blur of feigned normalcy. I asked if he was hungry. He wasn't. I got him a glass of water. He drank it gratefully. We got into bed, the vast, comfortable space that had always been my sanctuary. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing falling into a deep, even rhythm. But for me, sleep was an impossible country I could no longer enter. I lay there, staring into the darkness, hyper-aware of the man beside me. His familiar presence now felt menacing. The scent was on the pillows, a faint but persistent reminder. Every time he shifted in his sleep, I would flinch. My mind was a torture chamber, replaying his words, his casual laugh, his easy explanation. Was I going crazy? Was I manufacturing a betrayal out of nothing more than stress and a stray molecule of perfume? I was the woman who designed serene, beautiful spaces, a master of logic and order. And now the interior of my own mind was a chaotic, terrifying mess. The rational part of me argued, pleaded for calm. It was a bar. You're exhausted. You're letting your imagination run wild. You're about to destroy the best thing in your life over nothing. But the other part, the wounded, instinctive part, whispered a more sinister truth. You know, don't you? The balcony, the name, the way he looks at his phone, and now this scent. It's her scent. It's the smell of Isabel. Sometime around 4 a.m., I slipped out of bed. I couldn't bear to lie next to him, to breathe in the air that felt so contaminated. I went into the living room and sat on the sofa, pulling a throw blanket around my shoulders, though the chill I felt was deep inside me. I looked out at the city, at the millions of lights representing millions of other lives, and I had never felt so completely, utterly alone. The rain had stopped, and the sky was beginning to soften to a bruised purple. A new day was coming, but I knew with a certainty that settled into my bones like a terminal disease that nothing would ever be the same. The fortress hadn't just been cracked. A spy had gotten inside the walls, leaving behind a perfumed calling card, a declaration of a secret war I hadn't even known I was fighting. Later, much later, when all the perfect walls of our life had been reduced to rubble and the truth came spilling out in a torrent of ugly, disjointed confessions, I would piece together the story of how it began. In the long, sleepless nights that followed my discovery, I would force myself to crawl inside his memories, to see the world through his eyes, to try and understand the precise anatomy of the moment that broke my life. I had to know. I had to see the first flicker of the flame that would eventually burn my world to the ground. It began, as I learned so many mundane tragedies do, not in a clandestine hotel room or a dimly lit bar, but under the sterile, unforgiving, fluorescent lights of a Manhattan office building, long after the city outside had gone to sleep. It was a place of work, of ambition, a place I had always associated with his success, not his betrayal. He described the office at night as a different world, a ghost ship floating in a sea of city lights. The daytime chaos was gone, replaced by a profound, humming silence, broken only by the quiet whir of computers and the distant, mournful cry of a siren on the streets below. He was exhausted, staring at a contract on his screen, the words blurring into meaningless symbols. He'd been there for 16 hours, fueled by stale coffee and the relentless pressure of the case. He was thinking of me, he said, thinking of our warm bed, of the safety and peace of our home. He was just about to finally pack it in when she appeared at the door of his office, a file in her hand. Isabel. She wasn't leaving either. She was a mirror of his own ambition, and in the strange, suspended reality of that late hour, he felt a pull of recognition, of kinship. She walked towards his desk, and he told me how, in that moment, the harsh overhead lighting that made everyone else look tired and sallow seemed to treat her differently. It fell on her as if it were a spotlight. She was wearing a blouse, the color of cream, made of a silk so fine it seemed to liquefy and ripple over her skin with every small movement. It wasn't revealing, not in an obvious way, but it clung just enough to hint at the elegant line of her collarbone and the soft, full swell of her breasts beneath. He remembered the way it gapped slightly when she leaned forward to point to a clause in the document, offering a fleeting, shadowy glimpse of the lace beneath. Her dark, wavy hair was tied back loosely, but strands had escaped to frame her face, softening the sharp intelligence of her features. Her eyes, which were so fiercely analytical during the day, seemed larger and deeper in the artificial twilight of the office. And her lips, he remembered her lips with a painful clarity. They were naturally full, the color of dark cherries, and were slightly parted, as if she were perpetually on the verge of saying something important, or perhaps something forbidden. She was youth, she was energy, a vibrant living thing in that sterile, gray space. The conversation started with work, as it always did. She had found another inconsistency, another small weakness in their opponent's argument. She spoke with a passion and clarity that cut through his fatigue. He found himself leaning forward, re-energized by her presence, the two of them falling into an easy, intense rhythm, their minds working in perfect sync. After they'd solved the problem, she didn't leave. Instead, she perched on the edge of the visitor's chair opposite his desk, looking at him with an unnerving directness. "I've never seen anyone dismantle an argument like you did in the meeting today, Liam," she said, her voice a low, intimate murmur that was startling in the empty building. "It was like watching a grandmaster play chess. They never even saw your final move coming. The praise was intoxicating. At home, I loved him for his kindness, his humor, his steadfastness. I loved the man, the husband. But Isabel admired the warrior, the legal gladiator. She was worshiping at the altar of his ambition, an altar he had perhaps felt I had long since taken for granted." He found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in what felt like months. He told her about the pressures of the job, the constant demand to be perfect, to win at all costs. She listened, her dark eyes never leaving his face, making him feel as though he were the only person in the world. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathetic noises. She understood. "That's why we do it, isn't it?" she said softly. "For the win. For the moment when you know you were smarter, faster, better." She got it. She understood that dark, competitive corner of his soul that he tried to smooth over when he came home to our gentle, peaceful life. She wasn't just beautiful. She was a reflection of a part of himself he kept hidden from me. The conversation drifted, becoming more personal. He asked why she was pushing herself so hard. She spoke of her family, of her fierce need to prove herself, to build a life on her own terms. And in a moment of weariness, a moment of weakness, he would curse for the rest of his life. He let his guard down completely. "Sometimes," he confessed, looking past her at the glittering, indifferent city, "sometimes I wonder if it's even worth it. All these hours, all this fighting, you miss out on life." And then she did it. She leaned forward, closing the small space between them, and placed her hand on his forearm where it rested on his desk. It wasn't a flirtatious gesture, not overtly. It was meant to look like empathy, a simple, comforting touch between two tired colleagues sharing a moment of vulnerability. But it was not simple. According to him, it was like a lit match dropped into a pool of gasoline. Her fingers were long and cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the stuffy heat of the office. The touch was light, yet it seemed to burn him, a jolt of pure electricity that shot up his arm and exploded in his chest. His breath caught in his throat. It was a current that awakened nerve endings that had been slumbering for years under the warm, comfortable blanket of my familiar love. My touch was safety, it was home, it was peace. Her touch was a question, a danger, a promise of something unknown and thrilling. He didn't pull his arm away. He couldn't. He was paralyzed by the shock of it, by the sudden, ferocious awareness of her as a woman, not an associate. He could smell her perfume, the same one I would later identify as the scent of my own heartbreak. He could see the pulse beating gently at the base of her throat. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, her fingers on his skin. She left her hand there for a beat longer than was necessary, a silent acknowledgement that a line had just been crossed. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she withdrew it. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "It's worth it, Liam," she whispered. "Good night." She stood up and walked out of his office, leaving him alone in the humming silence. He told me he sat there for a long time, his arm still tingling where she had touched him. He looked out at the sprawling infinite lights of the city, but he wasn't thinking about the case, and he wasn't thinking about coming home to me. He was thinking only of her. The betrayal hadn't happened yet, not in the physical sense, but the seed, the poisonous, irresistible seed, had been planted, and in the barren, lonely landscape of that late-night office, it had already begun to grow. That night, after the discovery of the scent, the air in our apartment changed. It became heavier, charged with unspoken words and the suffocating weight of my suspicion. The fortress I had so carefully designed, once a sanctuary of light and warmth, began to feel like a prison. Liam, for his part, seemed oblivious, or perhaps he was just a far better actor than I had ever imagined. He moved through our life with a determined normalcy, but I could now see the fine cracks in his performance. There was a new tension in his shoulders, a slight edge to his voice when he thought I wasn't listening, a shadow in his eyes that his easy smiles could no longer quite hide. The real shift, the one that became a constant, throbbing source of pain, was his phone. It had once been a casual object, left on the kitchen counter, used to play music, a tool we both shared. Now, it was a fortress, a small, black monolith to which I had no access. It was always with him, an extension of his own hand. When he sat on the sofa, it was in his pocket, or placed face down on the cushion beside him. At dinner, it rested by his plate, angled so I couldn't see the screen. At night, it lay on his bedside table, a silent, glowing sentinel guarding secrets in the dark. He had a new password, a complex pattern of swipes I couldn't decipher, and the casual transparency of our life had vanished. The phone would buzz late at night, a low, insistent vibration from his side of the bed. In the past, he would have groaned, cursed his boss, and ignored it until morning. Now his hand would dart out with a reptilian speed, snatching it before the second buzz. The bluish light would illuminate his face, casting him in a ghostly, unfamiliar glow as his thumbs moved in a rapid, furtive dance across the screen. "Work?" I'd ask, my voice small in the darkness. "Yeah," he'd mutter, not looking at me. "Just a final email." But the intensity, the sheer, focused privacy of the act felt like a betrayal in itself. It was a conversation happening in my bed that I was not a part of. One Saturday morning, the dam of my restraint finally broke. He was on the sofa, laughing at something on his phone, a genuine, unguarded laugh that I hadn't heard directed at me in weeks. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound light, breezy. He looked up, and his smile instantly vanished, replaced by a shuttered, neutral expression. "Oh, nothing. Just a stupid meme a colleague sent." He angled the phone away from me. "Who's the colleague?" The question was out before I could stop it. His jaw tightened. "Alara, what is this?" "It's just Mark from accounting. Can I not get a text without an interrogation?" He turned it on me, his voice laced with an indignation that made me feel small, irrational. "I'm working 80-hour weeks for us, for this life. The least you can do is trust me." The word trust hung in the air between us, a cruel, bitter joke. He had weaponized it, using my own desire to believe in him as a shield for his lies. I retreated, mumbling an apology, my cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and fury. He had made me the villain, the paranoid wife, and the worst part was, I was beginning to believe him. Alongside the secrets, a new version of Liam began to emerge, one I didn't recognize. He, who had always been content with his classic well-made suits and comfortable weekend clothes, started to change. It began with a new pair of shoes, expensive Italian leather loafers that were far more stylish than his usual practical choices. Then came the shirts, more fitted, in bolder colors. He bought designer jeans that he wore with a new, swaggering confidence. One day he came home with a new cologne, a sharp, woody scent that was nothing like the clean, familiar one I used to buy for him. It was the scent of a man trying to be noticed. He got a new haircut, shorter on the sides, more styled. He was curating a new identity, and I knew, with a certainty that made me sick to my stomach, that it wasn't for me. I would watch him getting ready to leave in the morning, taking extra care with his appearance, and a cold dread would wash over me. He was dressing for her, for Isabel. He was polishing his armor for a battle I wasn't even invited to watch. The psychological toll was devastating. I felt myself changing, twisting into a version of a woman I never wanted to be. I started listening at doors. I'd check his coat pockets for receipts when he was in the shower, my hands shaking, my heart pounding with the fear of what I might find, and the self-loathing for the act of looking. The confident, serene woman who designed beautiful homes was gone, replaced by a ghost who haunted her own life, constantly searching for clues to its destruction. The nights were the worst. I would lie beside him in our bed, in the beautiful bedroom I had designed to be a haven of peace, and feel like I was lying next to a complete stranger. The physical space between us felt like a vast, frozen ocean. Sometimes, he would roll over and initiate sex, and I would let him, hungry for any scrap of our old intimacy. But it felt hollow, a desperate physical act devoid of the emotional connection that had once been its soul. It felt like he was performing a duty, or worse, practicing moves he had learned with someone else. I would lie there afterwards, his breathing heavy with sleep beside me, and silent tears would stream down my face into my pillow, a lonely, saltwater baptism for my dying hope. Just when I thought I couldn't endure the tension any longer, he would throw me a lifeline. He came home one Friday with a huge bouquet of my favorite peonies. "I'm sorry I've been so distracted," he said, his voice full of the old warmth, his eyes looking directly into mine for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "This case has been a nightmare, but it's over. Let's get away. Just us. This weekend. Let's go to that little inn in the Hudson Valley we love." Hope, that treacherous, resilient thing, flared in my chest. For a moment, the sun broke through the suffocating clouds. I allowed myself to believe. I convinced myself I had been wrong, that the stress of his job had just temporarily changed him. And now my Liam, my real Liam, was back. I packed our bags with a frantic, joyful energy. This would fix us. The clean country air, the familiar comfort of the inn, it would wash away all the suspicion and fear. But the chasm between us was too wide to be bridged by a 2-hour car ride. The weekend was a disaster. He was physically present, but his mind was elsewhere. His phone, which he had promised to turn off, buzzed incessantly. On Saturday afternoon, as we were meant to be going for a walk, he got a call. "I have to take this," he said, his face grim. "It's an emergency with the closing." He spent the next 2 hours on the small balcony of our room, his back to me, the glass door closed. I watched him through the window, a terrible echo of that first night on our own balcony. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see his posture, the animated gestures, the way he paced back and forth, the brief smile that touched his lips. It was not the body language of a man dealing with a work crisis. It was the body language of a man talking to someone who excited him, someone he was trying to charm. The sliver of hope I had clung to died a cold, painful death. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room suddenly feeling like a cheap motel set, and I finally let the truth in. I was no longer fighting the suspicion. I was surrendering to the certainty of it. I didn't know the details. I didn't have the proof, but I knew. I knew he was living another life, a life in which I had no part. And as I watched my husband laughing softly into his phone, separated from me by a pane of glass, I knew the question was no longer if our marriage was over, but simply when I would find the courage to pronounce it dead. Of all the parts of his confession, the story of the first time was the most difficult to hear. It wasn't a single, coherent narrative. It came out in broken images, flashes of memory he seemed to recount with a horrifying mixture of deep, soul-crushing shame and a strange, lingering thrill that made my stomach turn. He was trying to make me understand, to explain the inexplicable weakness of that one night. But all I could do was listen, collecting the jagged pieces of his story and arranging them in my mind into a mosaic of my own destruction. This is what I pieced together. This is the moment the line was not just crossed, but utterly obliterated. It was born from a victory, watered with expensive champagne, and it culminated in the sterile anonymity of a hotel room that would become the birthplace of his new life, and the graveyard of ours. "It started," he said, "with the whole team at a celebratory dinner at one of those ridiculously expensive steakhouses in Midtown. The energy was electric, the relief and elation of winning the case, making everyone loud and boisterous. He and Isabel were at the center of it, the architects of the victory, and the partners toasted them repeatedly. He remembered catching her eye over the rim of his champagne glass, a silent, shared acknowledgement of their triumph. A secret current passed between them, a sense that this victory belonged to them in a way the others couldn't understand. As the night wore on, the team began to peel off, heading home to their families, until finally, it was just the two of them left at the table, the remnants of the celebration scattered around them. The night felt too young, the adrenaline still too high, to simply say goodnight and part ways. "I don't want this night to end," she said, her voice a low murmur, and it was both a statement and a question. He agreed. They ended up at a hotel bar nearby, a dark, sleek place with low lighting and deep leather chairs, the kind of place where secrets felt safe. The city was a glittering, abstract blur through the plate glass window. In that dim, intimate space, she seemed to transform. She was wearing a simple, sleeveless black dress that ended just above her knees. In the office, it had looked professional, but here, it looked like a promise. It clung to her body, tracing the impossible curve of her wasp waist and the gentle flare of her hips. When she crossed her legs, the dress rode higher, revealing the long, toned line of her thighs. He told me he couldn't stop looking at her. The way the candlelight caught the sharp line of her jaw, the way her dark eyes glittered with an intelligence that was both intimidating and intensely arousing. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as the expensive whiskey he kept ordering. They spoke of ambition, of law, of life, but beneath the words, a different conversation was happening, one of stolen glances, of fingers brushing as they reached for a glass, of a palpable, magnetic pull that grew stronger with every passing minute. At some point, she mentioned she was staying at the hotel for the night, a convenience for an early morning meeting. The words hung in the air, a casual statement that was also a clear invitation. He remembered the elevator ride as a moment of pure, suspended tension. The polished brass doors closed, sealing them in a small, silent box. He could smell her perfume, that jasmine and amber scent, and it was dizzying. He saw their reflection in the mirrored walls, the tall, powerful lawyer and the beautiful, brilliant associate, a perfect, dangerous couple. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, her lips slightly parted, her breath shallow, and in the silent assent, he finally gave in. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, a release of weeks of unspoken desire, and she met his hunger with her own, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The ding of the elevator arriving at her floor was a shrill interruption. The hotel room was like any other luxury room, impersonal, elegant, a pristine stage for the messy, human drama that was about to unfold. The moment the door clicked shut, they were on each other again, a tangle of limbs and desperate mouths. Her dress had a long zipper down the back, and he fumbled with it, his hands shaking. He remembered the sound of the zipper, a sharp, decisive sound, like a final cord being cut. The dress pooled in a black puddle at her feet. He told me the sight of her nearly stopped his heart. She stood before him in a delicate, expensive-looking set of black lace lingerie. The bra and panties did little to hide the perfection of her body. They framed the twin peaks of her breasts, which were high, round, and pale like alabaster in the dim light from the window. They accentuated her impossibly small waist and the full, high curve of her bottom. She was a work of art, and in that moment, she was his. As he reached for her, a sudden cold wave of reality washed over him. My face, my trusting smile, flashed in his mind. "Isabel," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We can't. This is wrong. I have a Lara." He said my name. He spoke my name in that room, and that, somehow, was the cruelest cut of all. She didn't argue. She didn't try to reason with him. She simply stepped closer, placed her cool hand on his chest, right over his frantically beating heart. "Shh," she whispered, her dark eyes holding his. "Don't think, Liam. Not tonight. Just for tonight. There's only here. Only us." She rose on her toes and kissed him again. A slow, deep kiss that systematically dismantled all of his remaining resistance. His confession became fragmented after that, a series of sensory flashes, the feeling of the cool silk of her skin under his hands, the surprisingly soft texture of her lace bra as he unhooked it, the weight of her breasts in his palms, the taste of whiskey, and her lipstick on her tongue. The act itself was a blur of frantic, selfish pleasure. All his guilt, all thoughts of me, were incinerated in the raw, white-hot fire of a new and forbidden body. He remembered her sounds, the quiet gasps that turned into low moans as he learned the rhythm of her pleasure. He remembered her whispering his name, a desperate, breathless mantra. "Oh God, Liam. Yes, right there. Please, don't stop. He heard my name in his head, a silent scream of protest, but he pushed it down, deeper and deeper, until it was silenced by her cries. He was lost, a man drowning in a sea of foreign sensation, clinging to the wreckage of his own honor. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. As soon as it was over, as the waves of pleasure subsided, the crushing weight of what he had done slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He lay in the unfamiliar bed, the sheets tangled around them, and listened to the sound of her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep. He was wide awake. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a cold, hollow shame. The anonymous luxury of the room felt sordid, cheap. He thought of me, alone in our bed, in the sanctuary I had made for us, and the contrast was a form of self-inflicted torture. He couldn't stand to be there, to be in that bed, for a second longer. Quietly, carefully, he slipped out from under the sheets, gathered his clothes from the floor, and dressed in the dark. He didn't look at her as he left. He couldn't. He just walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him, and fled. He stepped out of the hotel's revolving doors into the cold, pre-dawn air of New York City, a man who had just set his own life on fire and was now walking away, covered in the scent of its smoke. The man who came home to me in the pale gray light of dawn was not the same man who had left the morning before. I didn't know it then, not consciously, but some primal part of my soul registered the shift. He had walked out of our home as my husband, and he returned as a stranger playing a familiar role. His confession later filled in the blanks of that morning. He described walking the cold city blocks from the hotel, the shame and adrenaline warring inside him. He remembered standing outside our apartment building for a long time, watching the lights in our window, unable to bring himself to insert the key into the lock. He was a soldier returning from a foreign war, terrified that the scent of its battles still clung to him. His first act upon entering our home was not to find me, but to find the shower. He told me he stood under the scalding water for what felt like an hour, scrubbing his skin raw, trying to wash away the scent of her perfume, the feel of her hands, the memory of her body. He was trying to physically erase his sin before he had to face me, the living embodiment of his betrayal. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, his performance had begun. He was apologetic, blaming an unbelievable crisis with the merger for his all-nighter. He was tender, pulling me into an embrace that felt both desperate and hollow, his lips cool against my forehead. The next morning, he brought me coffee in bed, a small, romantic gesture he hadn't made in years. I was momentarily touched, but also vaguely unsettled. It felt deliberate, calculated. It was the first brick laid in the new, elaborate facade of his guilt. From that day on, our life became a strange, disorienting play. Liam, who had always been a man of steady, quiet affection, transformed into a caricature of a devoted husband. The overcompensation was a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. Gifts began to appear for no reason. One Tuesday, a massive bouquet of fragrant, white lilies, my favorites, arrived at my office with a note that read, "Just because I'm the luckiest man in the world." Another week, it was a pair of delicate diamond earrings left on my pillow. He made reservations at Impossible to get restaurants, planned elaborate date nights, and spoke constantly of booking a trip, just the two of us, to Italy, a dream we had long deferred. These gestures should have been reassuring, but they felt like a frantic attempt to distract a child with a shiny new toy. The gifts felt less like offerings of love and more like payments of conscience, beautiful, expensive bribes to buy my continued ignorance. His affection, too, became a suffocating blanket. He was constantly touching me. His hand would find mine while we were watching a movie, his grip almost painfully tight. He would wrap his arms around my waist from behind while I was cooking, burying his face in my neck. He'd text me multiple times a day. "Thinking of you, I love you so much," counting the minutes until I'm home. This relentless barrage of affection was the opposite of the easy, comfortable intimacy we had shared for 7 years. That intimacy had been a quiet, steady river. This was a loud, crashing waterfall designed to deafen me to the silence that was growing between us. I felt like a patient being force-fed, a sugary medicine, and the sweetness of it was making me sick. Beneath the performance, I could see the cracks in the actor. He was a man being eaten alive from the inside. He had trouble sleeping, often jolting awake from nightmares with a muffled cry, his body drenched in sweat. He began to drink more, pouring himself a second, and then a third, glass of whiskey each night, his eyes staring at nothing. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I would catch him watching me from across the room, and the expression on his face was one of such profound, gut-wrenching sadness that it would take my breath away. It was the look of a man mourning a loss, and the terrifying truth was that the loss he was mourning was the integrity of the very life he was still living with me. This glimpse of his torment was almost more painful than his lies, because it showed me that the good man I had married was still in there, trapped inside the body of a liar, a helpless witness to his own self-destruction. I was trapped right there with him, in a state of excruciating confusion. His behavior was a constant, dizzying push and pull. One moment, he was the hyper-attentive, perfect husband, making me breakfast and telling me I was beautiful. In those moments, a dangerous, treacherous hope would flicker within me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he really is just stressed. Maybe he knows he's been distant, and this is his way of trying to fix it. I would cling to this narrative, this life raft, with all my might. But then, an hour later, he would be a different person entirely. He would be standing on the balcony taking a work call, his back to me, his voice a low, intimate murmur. Or he would be on the sofa, angled away from me, a small, secret smile on his face as he texted, the phone held in a way that made it clear it was a private world. The life raft would disintegrate, and I would be back in the cold, dark water, gasping for air. Our home became a theater for this strange, tragic play. Our beautiful living room, with its memories of laughter and shared dreams, was now just a set. Our conversations felt scripted, full of polite questions and carefully edited answers. How was your day? Good, busy. And yours? We were two actors going through the motions, the subtext of deceit hanging so heavily in the air it felt hard to breathe. The pinnacle of this performance came during a dinner at a famous, 3-Michelin-starred restaurant he had booked weeks in advance. The room was opulent, the service was flawless, and we looked, to anyone watching, like the perfect, successful New York couple. Liam was at his most charming, his most attentive. He held my hand across the table, his thumb stroking my knuckles. He told the waiter stories about how we met. He raised his glass of champagne and toasted me, his eyes full of a powerful, practiced adoration. "To my beautiful wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the center of my entire world." For a moment, under the warm golden light, surrounded by the murmur of other people's happiness, I almost believed him. I wanted to believe him more than I had ever wanted anything. And then, it happened. His phone, which he had placed face down on the white tablecloth, vibrated. It was a single, discreet buzz, but his reaction was instantaneous. His eyes flickered down to the phone, and his entire body tensed. The loving smile on his face didn't vanish, but it froze, becoming a brittle mask. A shadow passed behind his eyes, a flicker of anxiety, of conflict, of being caught between two worlds. It lasted only a second. He recovered instantly, reaching for the wine glass, turning his full attention back to me. But I had seen it. That single, unguarded second had told me everything. The restaurant, the champagne, the toast. It was all a lie. It was an elaborate stage, and the loving man sitting opposite me was a ghost. The real Liam was somewhere else, being summoned by a vibration on a phone, and I was just dining with his replacement, a guilty actor playing the part of a husband. I looked around the beautiful room, at the perfect illusion we were presenting, and I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The web of lies he was spinning wasn't just hiding his affair, it was suffocating me, erasing the reality we once shared and replacing it with this hollow, terrifying performance. And I was his captive audience of one. If the first time Liam and Isabel were together was a deliberate, trembling step off a cliff into the unknown, the encounters that followed were a chaotic, reckless tumble into the abyss. The guilt was still there, he claimed in his confession, a constant toxic acid in the back of his throat, but it was now joined by something else, something more powerful, a desperate, insatiable hunger. The affair had become an addiction, a fever he couldn't break, and the need for a fix made him careless. The story of what happened in the car was the ugliest of them all, a memory he recounted with a self-loathing so profound it was almost palpable. It was a story stripped of any pretense of romance or seduction, a raw, sordid vignette that would, in its clumsiness, leave behind the very piece of evidence that brought his secret world crashing down around him. It had been another long day, culminating in a mandatory work dinner with a visiting client. He described the agony of sitting across a table from Isabel for 3 hours, forced to maintain the perfect professional facade. They were Liam and Isabel, the brilliant legal team, exchanging polite smiles and discussing market trends, while under the table, a firestorm of unspoken desire was raging. He said he could feel the heat of her leg near his, could see the pulse beating in her throat when she laughed at one of the client's bad jokes, and the effort of appearing normal was a physical torment. The dinner finally ended. As the group dispersed into the rainy New York night, he offered her a ride home, a gesture that was both practical and pregnant with unspoken intent. The walk to the parking garage was silent, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the damp, empty space. The city around them was a blur of wet asphalt and neon reflections, a perfect, anonymous backdrop for the sin they were about to commit. The moment the heavy car doors closed, sealing them inside the dark, leather-scented interior, the pressure became unbearable. The forced politeness of the evening evaporated, replaced by a thick, charged silence. The rain began to fall harder, drumming a frantic, urgent rhythm on the roof. She was the one who broke the spell. She didn't say a word. She simply unbuckled her seatbelt, turned towards him, and placed a hand high on his thigh, her fingers gripping him with a surprising strength. He said it was like a detonator had been triggered. All the tension, all the frustration, all the suppressed need from the past few weeks erupted in an instant. He lunged at her, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was not tender but brutal, a clash of teeth and tongues. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated desperation, a frantic attempt to consume, to possess, to silence the noise in his own head. The cramped, awkward space of the car's front seat became their stage. It was not a place for grace or elegance. It was a cage for a raw, animalistic act. The gear shift dug into his hip, the steering wheel pressed against her back, but these discomforts only seemed to fuel their frenzy. The windows began to fog up almost immediately, the condensation spreading across the glass, sealing them in their own private, steamy world, hiding their sordid tableau from the indifferent city. His hands were everywhere, fumbling with the buttons of her coat, pushing it aside to get to the silk of her blouse beneath. He remembered the frantic, clumsy haste of it all. Her skirt was hiked up around her waist, revealing the tops of her stockings and the dark lace of her underwear. He worked at the clasp of her bra, the same black lace one he had seen that first night, but his fingers were clumsy with need. He gave up, simply pushing it up and out of the way, desperate for the feel of her skin. It was in this rough, urgent moment of haste that the flimsy piece of lace was torn or simply forgotten, a casualty of their recklessness. His confession faltered here, becoming a string of broken, sensory details. The scent of her perfume mixed with the rain on her coat, the sound of their ragged breathing, loud in the enclosed space, the squeak of the leather seats beneath their shifting bodies. Her voice, no longer the composed, articulate lawyer's, was a series of low, guttural sounds, a language of pure physical need. He remembered her hands gripping his hair, her nails scraping his back as she pulled him closer, her hips arching to meet his. Her words were not whispers of love, but raw, direct commands. "Don't be gentle, Liam," she gasped, her voice thick with pleasure. "God, I need it. And harder." The sounds that filled the car were a symphony of the profane, the rustle of their clothing, the slick sound of skin against skin, and her voice, rising and falling with the rhythm he set. "Right there. Oh God, yes. Liam. Deeper. Please. Don't stop." He was lost. All thought, all conscience, all memory of me, and the life he was destroying, was drowned out by the primal, roaring sea of sensation. He was no longer a husband, a partner, a man of integrity. He was just a body, an animal acting on a desperate, selfish instinct, seeking a release that was as violent as it was temporary. The climax was a frantic, shuddering release that left them both breathless and slick with sweat. In the immediate aftermath, a cold, stark silence descended, broken only by the drumming of the rain and their own harsh breathing. The fog on the windows began to clear in patches, revealing the blurred, distorted lights of the parking garage. Reality began to seep back in. There was no tenderness, no afterglow. There was only a frantic, clumsy scramble to put themselves back together, to erase the evidence of their transgression. They straightened their clothes, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. In the messy haste, in the adrenaline-fueled confusion, neither of them saw the small scrap of black lace that had fallen from the seat, slipping into the dark, forgotten space beneath it. Their only thought was to fix their hair, to wipe the condensation from the inside of the windshield, to reassemble the masks of their public selves before driving out into the light. The mistake had been made, but they were blind to it. He drove her home, the silence in the car now tense and functional. He dropped her at her building with a quick, impersonal kiss that felt more like the sealing of a sordid pact than a gesture of affection. And then he was alone. The car's interior was thick with the lingering scent of sex and her perfume. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a stranger, a man with flushed skin, wild eyes, and a smear of her lipstick near his mouth. He wiped it away, but he couldn't wipe away what he had done. He drove home to me, completely, blissfully unaware that he was a courier, delivering the ticking time bomb that would eventually blow his world, and mine, apart. He was carrying the proof of his sin with him, a small piece of black lace, hidden in the darkness, waiting patiently to be found. A guilty conscience is a clumsy and unpredictable thing. In the weeks leading up to that final, terrible day, Liam's guilt had manifested as a loud, suffocating performance of love. He was an actor playing the part of a devoted husband with a desperate, frantic energy. But on that last morning, the performance stopped. The actor had forgotten all his lines. He was replaced by a man so transparently riddled with anxiety, so consumed by a secret terror, that his every movement was a confession. The man who had committed a reckless, sordid act in his own car was now living in mortal fear of the evidence he had unknowingly left behind, and his panic was the catalyst for his own undoing. I woke up that morning to an unusual stillness. Liam was already out of bed, something that rarely happened on a weekday. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed for work, staring out the window at the gray, overcast sky. He was holding a mug of coffee, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just standing there, a statue of pure tension, his shoulders hunched up to his ears. "You're up early," I said, my voice soft in the quiet apartment. He startled, turning to me with wide, haunted eyes, like a thief caught in the act. "Couldn't sleep," he mumbled, his gaze skittering away from mine, refusing to connect. "Big day at work." The coffee he poured for me was bitter, burnt. Our usual morning routine, a comfortable, unspoken dance of passing each other the milk or the newspaper, was gone. He moved around the kitchen with a jerky, agitated energy, avoiding me, creating space where there had always been none. The air was thick with something unspoken, something heavy and wrong. I felt a familiar, cold dread begin to creep up my spine. It was as I was getting ready to leave for a client meeting across town that he made his fatal, clumsy mistake. My own car was in the building's garage, perfectly fine as far as I knew. But as I grabbed my purse, he intercepted me, blocking my path to the door. "Hey, could you do me a huge favor?" he asked, his voice strained, unnaturally high. "My car, it's been making this weird noise, a kind of clicking sound when I accelerate past 40. I don't have a second to take it to the mechanic today. My schedule is a nightmare. Would you mind taking it for your meeting? You have a better ear for these things than I do, just to see if you can hear it." I stared at him. The request was bizarre. I am an interior architect. My ear for things relates to the acoustics of a room, not the mechanics of a German engine. The excuse was so thin, so transparently false, that it was almost insulting. It was the clumsy, panicked lie of a man desperate to get a third party into that car, perhaps to find and remove something, or perhaps, on some subconscious level, he was a criminal who wanted to be caught. to end the unbearable strain of his own deception. "My ear?" I asked slowly, my eyes searching his for a flicker of truth, for any sign of the man I once knew. "Liam, I don't know the first thing about cars." He forced a laugh, a harsh, grating sound. "You're more observant than I am. Just listen for it, please. It would be a huge help." He was practically begging, his eyes pleading with me to accept the flimsy premise, to not pull at the single, loose thread that would unravel his entire web of lies. Against my better judgment, against every screaming instinct in my body, I heard myself agree. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. A wave of visible relief washed over his face. He pressed the heavy, cold keys into my hand, his fingers brushing mine for a moment. His skin was clammy. "Thanks, Alara. You're a lifesaver," he said, and then he was gone. A quick, distracted peck on my cheek and the sound of the front door closing behind him. I stood alone in the hallway, the keys to his car feeling like a cursed object in my palm. The weird noise wasn't in his car. The weird noise was right here, in my life, a screeching, discordant alarm that I could no longer ignore. The hours that followed were a kind of waking nightmare. I tried to work on the designs for my client, but the lines on the page blurred. The colors seemed to fade to gray. My mind was not in the sun-drenched living room I was creating on paper. It was in the dark, leather-bound interior of my husband's car. I kept replaying the morning, his strange request, the panic in his eyes. It was a puzzle, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the final, missing piece was waiting for me in that garage. I felt a sense of impending doom so powerful it was a physical presence in the room. I felt like a character in a tragedy, walking inexorably towards the final, devastating act. I looked at the clock on my computer. It was time to go, time to get in the car, time to face whatever was waiting for me. My own two hands, the ones I used to create beautiful, orderly spaces, felt like the hands of a stranger as I gathered my things. The walk down to the parking garage felt like a descent into the underworld. The air grew cooler, the smell of damp concrete and exhaust fumes filling my lungs. The echo of my own heels on the floor sounded like a slow, funereal drumbeat. And then I saw it. His car, a sleek, black sedan, polished to a mirror shine. It had always been his pride and joy, a symbol of his success, but today it looked menacing, a silent, dark vessel harboring a terrible secret. I had been a passenger in that car hundreds of times, laughing, talking, planning our future as the city lights streamed by. But today, I was approaching it as an intruder, an investigator. My hand was trembling so violently I could barely fit the key into the lock. The door clicked open with a heavy, final sound. I slid into the driver's seat, the expensive leather cool against my skin. It felt alien, wrong. This was his space, molded to his body. I adjusted the seat, moved the rearview mirror, a series of small, domestic acts that felt profoundly strange. The interior of the car held the faint, familiar scent of his cologne, but underneath it, there was something else, a ghost of a fragrance, something sweet and floral that had no business being there. It was the final, faint trace of her presence. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I was supposed to be listening for a noise, but I knew the noise was just a lie, a red herring. The truth was something else entirely. I took a deep, shuddering breath, a final preparation for the impact I knew was coming. My purse was on my lap, and I reached over to place it on the passenger seat. As I did, my knuckles brushed against the seat adjuster, and my gaze fell to the floor below. I wasn't looking for anything. Not really. But my eyes, now trained by weeks of suspicion, caught it. A sliver of black against the dark gray floor mat. A hint of a different texture. A shape that did not belong. My heart didn't stop. It just began to beat with a slow, heavy, painful certainty. The universe had led me to this exact spot, to this exact moment. I knew, with a clarity that was both terrifying and strangely calming, that the war of suspicion in my mind was over. I was about to hold the proof of my defeat in my own two hands. My breath hitched in my throat as my hand, no longer trembling but moving with a slow, deliberate purpose, reached down into the darkness under the seat. My fingers closed around the fabric. It was exactly as I had seen it in my mind's eye, in the nightmares that had started to haunt my sleep. Delicate, flimsy lace, and a cold, hard metal clasp. The scent, faint but unmistakable, rose from the material that cloying, sweet perfume of jasmine and amber, the scent that had haunted our bedroom weeks ago. It was real. It was all real. In the suffocating silence of the car, I felt the world tilt on its axis. The constant high-pitched hum of anxiety that had been my companion for months suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound, deafening, and terrifying calm. The truth, it turned out, was not a fire that burned you alive. It was a block of ice that froze you from the inside out. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or smash my fist against the steering wheel. I simply sat there, in the driver's seat of my husband's car, holding the physical proof of his betrayal, and felt nothing. It was the calm of a battlefield after the battle is over, a quiet devastation where the only thing left to do is count the dead. I drove home on autopilot. The bustling streets of New York, the blare of horns, the sea of anonymous faces, all of it passed by my window like a silent film. I was an astronaut who had become untethered, floating in a cold, airless void, looking down at a world I was no longer a part of. The single, fragile object on the passenger seat beside me was my new center of gravity. It was the anchor that had torn loose from our shared life and was now pulling me down into the abyss. I walked into our apartment, the home I had poured my heart and soul into designing. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes, just as it always did. But today, the light seemed garish, obscene. It was a spotlight on a crime scene. Every object seemed to mock me. The comfortable sofa where we had cuddled and watched movies, the bookshelf that held our two lives pressed together, the beautiful marble island in the kitchen where we had shared thousands of meals. They were all props from a life that was now a lie, a meticulously crafted stage set for a play whose final, tragic act was about to begin. I walked to the glass coffee table in the center of the living room, the one we had bought on our 3rd anniversary. With a slow, deliberate movement, as if I were placing a holy relic upon an altar, I laid the black lace bra in the very center of the glass. It sat there, a small, dark creature, obscene in its stark reality. Then, I sat on the sofa, folded my hands in my lap, and I waited. I watched as the sun crept across the oak floors, as the golden afternoon light softened into the bruised purple of dusk. I watched as the city outside our windows began to sparkle to life, a million tiny, distant stars. The silence in the apartment was absolute, a living, breathing thing. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was simply waiting. I had become a statue of patience, a silent witness waiting for the final actor to take the stage. The sound of his key in the lock was a gunshot in the silence. It was the sound I had once associated with safety, with the end of the day, with the beginning of our time together. Now, it was the sound of the executioner arriving. He walked in, humming softly, a briefcase in one hand. He was wearing his mask of cheerful normalcy. "Hey, honey, I'm home," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the unnaturally still apartment. "Traffic was a nightmare. Did you ever figure out that noise in the—" He stopped. He had rounded the corner into the living room and had finally seen me. He saw me sitting perfectly still on the sofa. He saw the expression on my face, a calm so complete it was more terrifying than rage. And then, his eyes, following my own unwavering gaze, dropped to the glass table between us. He saw the bra. Time seemed to stop. I watched the color drain from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of horror. The cheerful, handsome husband I had loved for 7 years dissolved right before my eyes, replaced by a cornered, guilty stranger. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His briefcase, full of the legal documents that defined his important, successful life, slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a soft, dull thud. It was the only sound in the room. I finally spoke, and my voice was a stranger's, a low, dead thing scraped from the bottom of my frozen soul. "I believe I found the weird noise you were talking about. The words, his own pathetic lie, hung in the air between us, a razor-sharp blade. His first instinct, even then, even with the undeniable proof sitting before him, was to lie. It was a pathetic, reflexive spasm of self-preservation. What is that?" he stammered, shaking his head slightly, as if he could physically deny its existence. "Alara, I have no idea where that came from. It must be... a client must have left it. I gave someone a ride." The lies were pathetic, insulting, and they trailed off into a choked silence as he looked at my face. He saw that it was useless. My eyes, empty of tears, empty of rage, empty of everything but a vast, desolate knowledge, told him that the game was over. He broke. It was not a sudden crack, but a slow, complete crumbling. He sank down onto the armchair opposite me, his body folding in on itself as if his bones had turned to dust. His head fell into his hands, and a ragged, guttural sob was torn from his chest. And then the confession began. It was not a story, it was a flood, a torrent of broken words, of pathetic excuses and self-loathing, all tumbling out in a desperate, chaotic rush. "I'm so sorry, Alara. God, I'm so sorry. I never ever meant to hurt you, I swear." The words were interspersed with the names of projects, with the pressures of work, with a string of justifications that all sounded like the desperate pleas of a drowning man. It just happened. I was working so hard, and she understood that part of my life. It wasn't about love, Alara, not like us. And then he said her name. Isabel. He spoke her name into the sacred space of our home, and the sound of it was a final, unforgivable violation. He told me everything. The late night in the office, the first touch, the hotel, the car, the constant, endless web of lies. I sat there, a statue carved from ice, and I listened. I listened as the man I had given my heart to, the man whose children I had dreamed of, systematically recounted every single blow he had dealt to the life we had so carefully built. He was not confessing to me. He was vomiting up his own poison, trying to purge his own guilt. I was just a witness to his selfish, desperate exorcism. When he was finally done, the ugly, sordid story lay in pieces all around us, glittering like broken glass in the ruins of our living room. He was on his knees now, his face streaked with tears, his body shaking with ragged sobs. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading hope. "Please, Alara," he whispered, his voice broken. "Say something. Scream at me. Hit me. Please, say something." The silence stretched on. I looked at him, at this pathetic, broken stranger on the floor of my home. The ice inside me had finally cracked, but it did not melt into tears. It broke into a million tiny, sharp shards of something cold and hard. I rose from the sofa. He flinched, as if expecting a blow, but I just looked down at him, and with the last ounce of the woman I used to be, I spoke. My voice was a hollow whisper, the sound of a door closing on a life. Forever. Go. There was no storm. There was no screaming, no shattering of glass, no satisfying cinematic explosion of rage. When a world truly ends, it does not go out with a bang. It ends in a silence so complete, so absolute, that you can hear the sound of your own heart breaking. My single word, go, hung in the air of our beautiful, ruined living room, and it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the space. Liam stared at me from the floor, his face a mess of tears and disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that 7 years of love could be extinguished with a single, whispered syllable. He started to speak, to plead again, his mouth forming my name, but the sound died in his throat when he saw my eyes. He saw that the woman he was trying to appeal to was already gone. There was no one home. I turned and walked into our bedroom. My movements were slow, strangely calm, as if I were moving through water. I didn't pull out suitcases and frantically pack up my life. That life was over. You cannot pack a ghost. I simply opened my closet, took out a small overnight bag, and placed inside it a few necessities. A toothbrush, a clean shirt, a book I would not be able to read. It was the kind of bag one packs for a weekend away, not for the permanent evacuation of one's entire existence. I walked through the apartment one last time. I did not look at the photographs on the wall, or the souvenirs from our travels, or the life we had curated with such love and care. I looked through them. They were artifacts from another time, another civilization, and they no longer had any meaning. Liam was still on the floor where I had left him, a broken, sobbing heap of a man. I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even the faintest echo of the love that had once been the central pillar of my life. There was only a vast, cold, empty distance. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the hallway. I pulled the door closed behind me, and it clicked shut with a soft, final sound, sealing him in with the ruins he had created. Months passed. The vibrant, fiery colors of autumn bled into the stark, skeletal monochrome of a New York winter. My life became a series of numb, administrative tasks. There were calls with lawyers, the signing of papers, the cold, clinical process of dismantling a marriage. The apartment, our sanctuary, was put on the market and sold with an almost obscene swiftness. I saw pictures of it online, staged for prospective buyers, my personal touches erased, our history whitewashed. It was now just a property, a collection of rooms waiting for a new story to be written within its walls. Friends tried to reach out, their voices full of a well-meaning pity I could not stand. They wanted me to be angry, to rage, to seek revenge. They wanted to know about her, about Isabel. But I had no interest. She was irrelevant, a footnote in the story of our collapse. She had not broken our home. She had simply walked through a door that Liam had already unlocked from the inside. The betrayal wasn't that he had desired another woman. The betrayal was that he had been willing to burn down the entire world we had built just to feel the warmth of a different fire. I found a new apartment on the other side of the river. It was a small, characterless place with white walls and big windows that looked out over the Williamsburg Bridge. It was a place with no memories, a blank slate. I furnished it sparsely, with a mattress on the floor, a single chair, and a drawing table. I was free. That's what everyone told me. I was free from the lies, from the suspicion, from the pain of his deceit. But this freedom was a heavy, desolate thing. It was the freedom of a vast, empty landscape after a forest fire, all ash and silence. The phantom limb of my old life ached with a pain that would ambush me at the most unexpected moments. I would be walking down the street and see a man with the same kind of coat Liam used to wear, and for a split second, my heart would leap with a sick, Pavlovian recognition. I would hear a song on the radio, one we had sung off-key to on a long car ride, and I would have to duck into a doorway until the wave of nausea passed. The ghost of our life was everywhere. Tonight, I am standing by the window of my empty apartment, looking out at the endless, glittering web of the city. It's been almost a year. Outside, the world moves on. The traffic flows across the bridge like blood through veins. The lights of Manhattan twinkle with an indifferent beauty, and millions of people are living out their own stories of love and loss. I wonder if he is out there, with her, building something new on the ashes of what he destroyed. I find that I no longer care. The anger has faded. The sharpest edges of the pain have dulled into a constant, low-grade ache. What remains is a profound, unshakable sadness, and a question that haunts the quiet hours of the night. How do you ever trust again? How do you look at another person and not search their eyes for the first shadow of a lie? How do you build a new house on ground that you know can split open at any moment? I don't have the answers. Maybe there are no answers. Maybe, once trust is shattered into a million pieces, it can never be made whole again. You can only learn to live with the dust. The image of the black lace bra lying on our glass coffee table is no longer a source of rage. It is a scar on my memory, a permanent part of my own interior architecture. It is a quiet, constant reminder that even the most beautiful structures can have a fatal, hidden flaw, and that some discoveries don't set you free. They simply leave you haunted, standing alone by a window, looking out at a world you no longer recognize as your own.